Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Small Business Stories. I am your host, Dr. LL, Loralyn Mears of Steeris, and in the house today I've got Glenn Poulos, a fellow Canuck, which is very exciting because we love having people from all over the world on the show. Glenn is the president of Prague, USA, and he's the author of Never Sit in the Lobby, which I'm particularly interested in because he talks about how do you apply professional selling, right? How do you get there? You get there through discipline. So we're going to get into some of that. So Glenn, welcome to the show.
Well, thanks for having me, Laura. It's great to be here.
So first off, let's just because of course everybody's been talking about the weather because it's been the winter from
Yeah.
hell and you're in Florida, but you're driving back and forth to and from Canada. Talk to us about using different systems and things to be able to measure power, power grids, and all of the dependencies that we as the average homeowner don't think about what's going on behind the scenes with respect to measuring, right? Device and outage and performance. Just give us a little sense of that.
Yeah, that's actually that's the business that I'm in, right? So we sell not yeah, we actually sell the measuring instruments. So we literally help the utilities measure the grid, right? And so we work on the high voltage lines. So when you drive by and see the giant towers and the giant transformers, those are taking hundreds of thousands of volts off those power lines and converting, and what's coming out of your wall is 120 volts, right? So it's coming down thousands of steps, to get to your house, right? And so we have systems that measure, what's the voltage going through it, how much current's going through it, is your grounding and all that safe, is it arcing, and can anyone get get hurt being near power lines and all that kind of stuff, right? And so and there's a vast number of standards and that the utilities need to meet, and they got to measure them with instruments, and that's what we do. We sell those instruments, right? And right from the little handheld tools you use to check your, the voltage coming out of your wall to, very heavy duty instruments that can connect to 400 kilovolts, right? So
Oh, exactly. And I wanted to set the stage for that because we don't have a lot of people that are in the space, right, of energy and even, get into some of the, even the levels of telecommunications and through where all of that sort of side of things is going. One of the things I want to ask about power is that as the populations continue to grow and we tend to congregate more and more in metropolitan areas, the impact on all of the power lines and just the surges, the collapses, all of that stuff must be just absolutely so dynamic and changing so rapidly year over year, given population growth. Do you have to build special tools to be able to look for that or measure them more often? Like, just give me a sense of what that's like. 'Cause it's really a blind spot for me, and I'm fascinated by it because obviously we're dependent on energy.
yeah. Well, really what they're doing mostly is praying because there's just
Oh
not
no.
enough power. There's just not enough power, right? And the other thing is like they're not making any more room, right? Like, and so, like if you're adding to a tight geography, which it sort of sounded like you were sort of talking about cities or something, or growing and things like that, like where do you put the lines, right? Because wireless is one thing. You can get internet from the space now, but you can't get power from space, right? You need power lines, right? And so where do you put them? And so power is the biggest challenge, right? And now these computers are sucking up so much energy, with the processors needing so much power, for AI and just gaming and any kind of machine that's using large computing power needs massive amounts of clean power, right? So they have to measure the power, make sure that it's clean power, and then they have to figure out how to deliver it, right? And the big challenge is that most of the power that's available today is already spoken for. And so when they're talking about putting in new data centers and things like that, they're having to try to cut deals to buy power for the next 20 years because where they're going to get someone to build a power plant for them and they're going to buy 100% of the output for 20 years in advance, right? The needs of how the power requirements of for our computing lifestyle is going up is just mind-boggling. And um and packing them more into cities won't help, that's for sure. I mean, it'd be easier to spread them out where you can get to them a little bit easier. Yeah. And yeah, and so there's a lot to be said on that topic. So
Oh yeah, and you didn't even mention cryptocurrency. I mean,
right,
that's a
Bitcoin
complete
mining for
computer
sure. Yeah,
hog,
it
right?
is indeed.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
crazy. And even where we are here in Jersey, we get a lot of brownouts. So there's
Right.
just slightly dimmed power in levels of things, right? Because
Yeah,
they don't want to give us a blackout, because then, of course,
that's
everybody
right.
just lose their minds, and the
Yeah.
energy companies never hear the end of it. But anyway, well, I appreciate you indulging me, and hopefully our audience members also enjoyed that bit of a deviation from where we usually go, because, well, we need power. If it were not for power, we couldn't be having this show right now and doing what we do.
Exactly.
So
Yeah.
wanted to set that stage. All right. So
Awesome.
your book, I have not read it, but Never Sit in the Lobby, just even the title compelled me. And again, I have a lot of guests, a lot of authors, a lot of books in my queue, but yours stood out to me because it's all about how we're showing up. And I saw myself in it immediately as soon as you said it, and thought, yeah, there were some days I was so burnt out, just didn't have it, just couldn't bring myself to go down to the lobby or the lobby bar and have a drink, even if it's non-alcoholic, and just sit there and idle chat and all the rest that I talk to everybody else at the conference during the day like I'm over it. But those are the greatest sales opportunities. So talk to us about your philosophy behind the book.
Well, it's funny because the angle that you put on the lobby there, no one's ever brought it up in that way. That's really kind of funny because I'm not talking about the lobby of the hotel, right? I'm talking about the lobby of the business. But it will, we could definitely, take a detour into how it relates to the lobby of the hotel as well, right? And what I mean by the never sit in the lobby is literally that, like, don't sit down. And so the thing that I learned is that you want to try to figure out how to get act and stay in front of your customers and be a pleasure to do business with always, right? Like that's the key. Okay. And so how do you do that? The best way is to not be a pain in the butt, right? Like don't be a pain, right? Because nobody likes salesmen that are a pain, right? And that's actually one of the things we hate the most, right? And door-to-door salespeople, we all know the, sort of, yeah. So, anyways, and so what I learned was that try to avoid things that I called not a good look, right? And so one of the not a good looks that I discovered was I would be on my phone in the lobby, I'd be distracted. You maybe trying to squeeze in a call to another customer to make an appointment. And then one customer walks out and you're on the phone with the other customer. You hang up on this guy, you tell that guy to wait. And he's like, what the heck? You came here to see me. And, that is not a good look. Right. And so when I show up, I just show up on time, a minute or two early. Right. And, obviously not late. Right. And, because I don't want to be standing for 10 minutes, right? And don't look at the plaques on the wall. Don't sit down. Don't work out the shopping list with your spouse at home on who's picking up the kids and grabbing the milk, right? Do all that when you show up 15 minutes early, spend 13 of them in your car doing a few other things that I'll talk about, but nonetheless. And then when the person walks out, you're standing at attention and you can greet them right away as they walk in. And one of the next rules in the book is always have something in your hand and something in your mind, right? Something to give them and something to tell them, right? And yeah, so and the same thing would be the same in the lobby of the hotel. If it's a networking event, after a trade show or something like that, if you're sitting down, this height disparity, not a good look, right? And you have to try to constantly try to rise up or whatever you want to stay. But that's a little different. The something in your hand is probably going to be a drink at that point, but nonetheless, but you want to have something in your mind. And I have a little trick in those environments where you're in the lobby, let's say of a trade show, hotel, what have you. You were, now there's a networking event with all the guests, and it's a little trick called watch your weekend problem, right? And so this is how you kind of engage with someone that you don't know, and what the heck do you say, right? Because you kind of get tongue tied, and so the first thing you do is try to find a watch or a brooch or a necklace or an accoutrement, on the person, right? That you can comment on. Like, oh, that's a lovely brooch. Like, what's the story behind that? Or that, wow, that's a really cool looking watch. What's the story behind that? Right. And most people, most of the time, are quite happy to kind of give you the backstory. Oh, my wife gave it to me, or I got it for graduating, or 40 years at a company, whatever, right? There's a story behind it, and oh, it's cool, I love watches, or this and that, right? It's a nice little and most people will gladly engage you and talk about it, right? And then you can sort of layer in, you can say, okay, so when you're not standing in the lobby of hotels after trade shows, trying to, keep your feet from getting too sore, what do you usually do for fun on the weekend, right? And so it's watch, then your weekend, right? So that's part two. And then, and they'll say, oh, I golf, I play pickleball, I run, whatever, I'm a video gamer, whatever it is. There's a multitude of things that they do. But through that, you're learning what they do and don't do, right? Are they golfers, or are they fishermen, right? Or are they such and such, right? And these will become super powerful later in the relationship that you gain with this person, right? And establishing genuine rapport, right? And then the other thing is, again, you're networking, right? So is watch your weekend problem, right? The problem is you say, okay, now the weekend's over, you've had your fun, you've been fishing all weekend, landed a few walleye, whatever it is, right? Do your best to have a fishing conversation. You're like, okay, when you hit when you're back at work on Monday at 8 a.m., what's the biggest problem your company's dealing with these days? Like, what's the challenge you guys are faced with, right? He's probably going to tell you, like, the economy's slow, our throughput's bad, we can't get raw materials, the tariffs are killing us. And you start to establish a bit of a rapport. So it's not just all about work or whatever. You've got a genuine rapport, right? And so that's one of the reasons why I never sit in the lobby. So so I can do all
I,
that.
I like it. So a couple of things I want to pick at there.
Yeah.
So one, by saying just standing there for that 2 minutes before you interface with your customer, not doing anything else, is it to get into the mindset, or is it more of what you were describing, that you don't want to honk, the other, your customer off, that you're there to see and make them feel less than or unimportant compared to what you're already doing? Or is it both?
Well, it's so that you're it's like when you're on the when like when the curtain comes up for a play, there's probably tape on the ground that you don't see it, but the person standing there is, and they're standing on it, right? And that's where you're standing on the tape, on the spot, waiting for the person to come out so you can just greet them and move into the next phases of the conversation, right? The and you're avoiding upsetting them by having untoward behaviors when you're sitting down, whether you're on the phone, reading, distracted, or whatever. But for me, one of the biggest things why I learned to stand up was that oftentimes I would meet these guys and they were 6'5" tall, and I'm only 5'6", right? And I'm sitting down and they're standing up, and there's a 4 foot difference between us, right? Not a good look. Can't happen, right? So I gotta like split. I gotta like lower my, lower the problem as much as I can, right? And so that's where I decided I was always going to be standing up, waiting, and just ready to go, right? And but I have a whole litany of things that I do, in preparing for that moment and after the moment occurs, so that there's a flow to it all, right? And yeah, so
Well, it is about readiness. And I used to wear heels for the same reason. So I could be taller because, again, most of the
yeah,
folks were well over 6 feet. Now in heels, I'm about 6 feet. So trying to
right,
hold my own there. But I want to go back to a comment you made, Glenn, about those 13 minutes in the car. You said, I've got a
yeah,
whole thing there of what to do, and I'll get to that later. Later is
yeah.
next. Let's go.
Okay.
What do you do in
So
that 13
yeah,
minutes?
because we all learned a long time ago that early is on time and on time is late, right? And so you are going to show up to 2 minutes because you don't want to sit in the lobby, so you only want to stand, so you just want to get there at the right time, right? And so what are you doing? Well, you want to get there 10, 15 minutes early and park, and then stay in your car, right? And while you're in your car, you go through what I call is the never forget a face rule, right? And so what you do is nowadays you just pull up your phone, right, or your laptop, your iPad, whatever it is you've got, and you go to the your client that you're visiting, right? And I'm often dealing with people that are dealing with territories, right? Like it's not like one and done. Like you visit a customer and never see them again. Like the customers I called on my entire life, right? Like I started calling on them in the 80s, and I still called on them up until I sold my company in Canada in 2022, right? And so these are 40-year relationships, and so I would go through my phone, I would go to the account, I'm visiting Honeywell, for instance, right? And I'd say, who have I ever met at Honeywell at this location ever? And I remember their face, right? That's the very first thing I do. I move their face from long-term memory at the back to short-term memory at the front. And that's so that when I bump into them later, and another rule I'll tell you about, I don't have to remember their face because I already did it. Because it's a really bad look when you bump into somebody and they're like, "Hey, Glenn," and you're like, "Oh, hey, Sally," right? It's like you'll never recover from that. You actually hurt their feelings to a point that's hard to measure. And the opposite is equally true. Remembering them, especially when they don't remember you, is like gold, right? Because later they're back in their brains. Who was that said hi to me? It was so nice in the hallway, right? And oh, right, that's Glenn, that guy that keeps selling us stuff, right? Oh, he's so nice. I love dealing with that guy. That's what their brain tells them, right? And so you want to do that so that you don't have those awkward moments. But it also builds social proof with maybe a new client, because when you're in the lobby, one of the things you're always asking them is for the mini tour, which is to get behind the Wizard of Oz curtain, to get into the building to see where you're interacting with your product or service. And that's so that you can flush out competitive threats, the reality of the operation. Are they really building a new warehouse? Are they really building a new office building or whatever? And on your way, you're walking and you're learning about, oh, I didn't realize they had that new department. I could be selling them stuff that I sell. And then of course, you ask them questions along the way, and you're building up a whole future of future interactions with this customer as you're walking through, and you're also saying hi to Sally, George, John, Paul, and Ringo, and making them feel good, right? And so yeah, so that's a little bit about what I do when I'm in the car.
And that's key. And where I want to shift now is I'm thinking about some of the sales leaders and that I've had where it's, okay, you've got to make X number of calls in a day. You've got to do this, you've got to do that. And I always push back and thought, well, why in sales does motion get equated with progress? Because I think you can be strategically more effective, but not necessarily busy, right? Full on. Talk to us about that little bit of a paradox.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's not all about, yeah, like just activity doesn't breed results in and of itself, right? I mean, the world that I'm in now, if my guys on a consistent basis did a call in the morning and a call in the afternoon, I would be like super happy, right? It takes a long time to get to places. There's lots of traffic. There's security to get through now. You got to check in, then you have to want to have a meaningful meeting, which might take an hour if it's, in the world of selling high ticket items that we sell. Two a day would be amazing. I don't need him to say he did 5 calls in a day. Whereas there was times before where you could wander the halls of universities and other labs and things, and you could just knock on doors and talk to doctors and engineers, and it would be fine. But now you can't even get in the front door without, obviously since the pandemic, everything's changed, right? But it's the number of calls you make is a leading indicator of your success, but it has to be relative to the products that you're selling, right? If it's a door-to-door salesman that's doing driveways, then obviously it's a numbers game, right? Every 9 out of 10 people are going to tell him no or whatever, and he's trying to get to the 10th call so he can do your driveway, right? Because that's where it wins for him. My business, I need to get to the right people that have an impact with the equipment that we sell. Everyone else doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how many of them I meet. They don't use the equipment. They're not a stakeholder in that equipment, right? And yeah.
When you talked about some of the relationships you had, you said, Glenn, like, oh yeah, these relationships, 30, 40 years, right? So they take a long time to develop. And that's also exceptional that you're still dealing with the same clients decades later. Talk to our audience about the behaviors that you should follow as a salesperson to help build and preserve those relationships versus the behaviors that, if you do those, you are likely going to start eroding trust and it's not going to be a long-term behavior. Talk to us about some of the differences, subtle and obvious.
Yeah. So for me, with customers, long-term customers, it's about this genuine uh and intuitive rapport that you build with each customer in the building, right? Because each one of them is different and the rapport needs to be genuine with each one, right? And so, and like, so just in the simplest of terms, like this guy, Jack, hates going out to lunch, right? And so you want to learn that early and never put the pressure on him where he's like, oh, thanks or whatever. You don't want to ask him out to lunch every time, right? Whereas Sally's group, she loves to go for lunch and she likes to bring a couple of her coworkers with her and get a free lunch, right? And nothing wrong with that either. And so you want to time the calls with Sally at 11:30 so you can just say, hey, I'm going to such and such for lunch. Do you and the gang want to come and grab a sandwich, right? You don't want to turn it into it doesn't have to be a big deal or anything like that. Whereas with the other guy, you want to do the exact opposite, right? You're better off showing up at 9 and never putting any pressure on him, right? Maybe bring him donuts, right? And maybe that's what he likes, right? And so it has to be. And then the genuine, the other thing about genuine rapport as well is like people think you should always be taking your customers golfing, right? Well, I hate golf. Like I'm not going to golf with. And so there's only one thing that I hate more than golfing, and that's people asking me to golf without taking time to get me to know that I don't like golf,
Right.
right? Like, so it's so disingenuous, right? And so everything has to be done genuinely, right? And so you have to. That's why if you see a picture behind someone's desk of them fishing or something like that, don't assume that they're fishermen, right? There's a story in the book about me making the mistake, right, of the fisherman, and it was his ex father-in-law who he hated, and he forgot the photo was there, and I like gave him PTSD for his divorce, and photos get thrown in the trash. Now he's in a bad mood. His wife wiped him out. And I mean, he didn't even like fishing, right? And so you want it to be genuine. You want to say, oh, what's the story behind that trophy on the, such and such? What, I noticed that you've got these colors. Are you a soccer fan or something? Whatever, right? But you want to build everything into a sense of genuine rapport. And you always want to be learning, where the customer's pain points are and understanding what they're going through and how they make their money. And that's really where most people break down, right? Like the first part of it is a little very common sensey, even though common sense is not that common, but you could sort of figure some of that out on your own. But most people don't actually do this other thing, which is literally figure out how your customer makes money, right? Like the mechanics of it, right? And because you might be in a building that's a factory that's part of a global network, right? So that particular building, maybe they make their money by making sub-assemblies that they ship somewhere else that go into a car, right? But they don't make money by selling cars, right? Like, and so you have to figure that out, right? And so one of the examples I give is always when you're calling on Xerox, right? And they make photocopiers, right? But that's not their business. They're a bank. They make their money leasing you photocopiers. That's how they make their money. The photocopiers are just a coincidental part of the business that they use to get into your building and get a monthly check from you forever, right? That's the way Xerox makes money. And so if you go at it from someone that you want to churn out as many photocopiers as possible, maybe that's the worst possible thing for Xerox, right? Maybe they want it to be completely, there's a completely different metrics involved in leasing products than there is to manufacturing electronics, right? And so that's where I try to expand it on people, and finding customers for your customers is the absolute best way of building long-term customer relationships. And yeah, so I'll take a breath so you can rambling on a bit. So yeah.
No, no, but there was a lot in that. Where I want to go next is to this whole, like, we're in this age of personal branding, right? It's how do you show up? Where do you show up? You're a LinkedIn guy, right? Other people, Instagram, this, that, wherever, or all of the above, YouTube, TikTok, the whole thing, right? It's endless.
Yeah.
And so there's that piece of it. We've got to be everywhere. We've got to be visible because, like, as I always say, invisible brands don't make money, right? Whether you're that brand trying to get promoted, trying to get your next job, or it's your company, right? Trying to sell something. Okay, so park that on that side. On this side, we've got all kinds of dynamics going on in every marketplace, every industry. The players are changing, they're consolidating, they're merging, they're disaggregating, they're this, they're that, they're going under, bankrupt, all these kinds of things, right? So there's tons and tons of dynamics going on. How do you recommend that sales folks balance creating their personal brand and the company, whatever that they're representing now? But how do they start to gear up for how that shift is going to come? Because inevitably they're going to be working for somebody else. Maybe they'll end up working for the biggest competitor. How do they make that shift and stay visible?
Yeah, I guess the first thing is you always want to be curating your brand as being a pleasure to do business with, right? Because um, and usually I say this sort of for the end, right? But I always try to end with one of my rules, which is you only get forever to make another impression, right? And so every impression has to be treated like that first impression your mother warned you about when you were going somewhere. And always make a good first impression, right? You have to always make a good impression because every impression is like a first impression. And and your career is curated by the sum of all of the impressions that you make to the people that control the path your career will take, right? And so it's so very important that you craft it, you control that so that your career will go in the way that you want, right? Or said in a more controversial way, if you want to go from driving the tow motor in the warehouse to the CEO of a Fortune 500 company, you just need to figure out who to kill along the way. And so, like, honestly, like you start as the warehouse guy, warehouse shop floor foreman, warehouse manager, director of warehousing, merchandising manager, vice president of merchandising. Then you move over to here, you take a thing in business development, do CEO, right? And you just got to figure out and every step of the way the people that are above them are deciding who's going to be the next person to go from warehouse manager to the director of warehousing nationally, right? And so you want to be curating the way you look to people at every step of the way, right? So but it's important that you're controlling your personal brand, your company brand, your product brands, right? And for me it's about your character, your values, how you think, how you treat people. These are the things that sort of come to mind. When it comes to the products and what have you, another rule that I like to share with people is if you're not selling the number one or number two brand in your business, you only have today, right? So you need to quit your job and go get a job at a better company, because selling the number three and number four brand, there's no hero medal that's going to get mailed to you for taking it on the chin and losing 80% of the business to the top two brands, right? Like you can't replace time. And so you spend all your time saying who are you, right? Versus selling the product and selling the solution that your product delivers, right? And some people are like, oh, that doesn't sound that great, but I mean it's true, right? If you got to sell things all day, you might as well sell the best product and be super excited to do it, and passionate about the product, not trying to build some, oftentimes you're building up your companies and things like that, but you always want to keep that in mind. I always want to be moving up in the brand and in the personal brand, the product brand, and the company brand that you're with, because you can't replace the time that you're spending on those, right? And yeah, so those are some of my. Maybe I did or didn't answer that question. I'm not too
Well, no,
sure.
you did, but it also triggered a response in my head, which is I've lived on that bleeding edge for so long in technology. I've been a technology evangelist more than I've been a salesperson. And that's a really, really tough spot to live in because you're
Yeah.
constantly educating, right?
Mhm.
People and saying, oh, this could be doing this could be this. It slices, it
Yeah.
dices, it's, all of the rest of that. Meanwhile, I always think back to where I started my career way back, Sun Microsystems, 1,000 years ago,
Oh yeah.
and Scott
Spark.
McNeely
The
in a
Spark
big,
workstations.
yes, yes, absolutely, right. And he was obviously the keynote at one of the Sun annual sales events, whatever. Big, 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 huge production, lots of energy, rah, rah, all of that sort of stuff. And he was talking about how hard it is to be an innovator. And what he said, like it's to this day, it sticks with me. And he says, it's so much harder to be Coke than it is to be Pepsi because Coke created the category cola.
Yeah.
Everyone wants a brown, sugary, syrupy drink over ice. And then you can just come along and be Pepsi and just make it better. Right. And
Right.
that's just it. Right. So anyway, I got us whatever a little bit off topic, but it just, oh, it brought up some nostalgia and some thoughts in it around that. So as we're looking at the next generation of folks coming up and you're coaching and helping and bringing these younger salespeople to the marketplace, right? Upping their level of readiness. What concerns you about how they're being trained now or what they're being exposed to, again, because of social media and the ubiquity of courses, this, that, everything online? So, what concerns you about that? And then what gives you a sense of optimism that, hey, I think this is going to be okay?
Um, yeah, so there's a few things that come to mind, but one I want to say like I'm 60, what was it, 19? What year is it? It's 22. I'm having a mental block here. It's 2026. So I'm 63 years old. Sorry, I can't, that's how old I am. I can't even remember how old I am, but I'm 63. So there became an age where all the important stuff my dad taught me, I had to like stop asking him the question, right? Like it wasn't at 63, right? But some points at over 70 or whatever, I'm not going to ask him what he thinks about Bitcoin, right? Like, and so, with all due respect, right? And so what I worry about younger people, it only going to have an impact for a few more years. And then I don't really feel I have a say, is what I'm trying to say, right? Because my age and all of the things that I've built up over the years, right? But the biggest thing that I always share with people is just the way I think about things. So sales is, most people confuse sales and marketing, right? They think sales and marketing is the same thing or it's together, right? To me, sales is when you're in front of a customer as close as you can get. So, yes, sometimes you're on Zoom like we are right now, but generally, I'm talking about trying to get in front of the customer face to face, right? And you're selling them. That's sales, closing the deals, right? Doing the selling. Everything else is marketing, leading you up to getting in front of the customer. And so figure out which department you want to work in and apply for a job there, right? Like in other words, the greatest salesmen are not sitting around like trying to figuring out how to leverage LinkedIn better or whatever, right? They're literally in front of customers. And so these are not, I'm not trying to be argumentative with it or whatever. Like, oh, I get lots of leads from LinkedIn. Great. But you could have a lot more leads hiring somebody else to do that because it's marketing and you just be in front of customers all day and they're sending the leads to you by whatever technology exists today. Maybe it's mental telepathy now, right? Because we're 5 years from now. It doesn't have to it's a Slack message, it's a this, they're text messaging you, whatever, smoke signals, it doesn't matter. But when you're going to go into sales, be a salesperson, right? Not thinking, oh, my chair's so comfortable, I got 3 monitors, I got LinkedIn here, and I got all my like data mining tools over here, and this and that and whatever. Really, unless you're on that phone calling the customer, like you're not selling, right? So that's just me ranting, a little bit, but that's why they pay salespeople so much too, right? So sales is like the cheat code to life for people that may or may not really deserve it, right? And there's only one other cheat code that's better than being a salesperson. That's owning the sales company that the salespeople work for, right? Because there's leverage in both, right? And the whole idea is that, if I want to make 400 grand a year, right, I can go and become a doctor and I got to go to residency. And I don't even know how many years it is. Let's say 10 years, right? 14 years. If I want to be some plastic surgeon or brain surgeon or something, then I make 800 grand a year or whatever. But in sales, you can make 50K your first year, you can be at 100 in the second year, you can be doing 250 in your third year. And then, and as long as you're working for the best company, selling the best products that you're most passionate about, you can easily make 400 grand a year selling, right? And so what other job, like accounting, you go to school, you get an accounting diploma, you go in accounting, the range is 75 to 95K for the director of finance or whatever. It's never going to change. There's no cheat code, right? And so if you're going to be in sales, be in sales, but if you're sales, be in front of customers and not behind your screen and things like that, right? And AI will help you get in front of more customers, but it won't do the in front of customer for you, right? And so I use all those tools as much as anyone on the planet uses them. And I'm running an entire business, not just the sales side of it. So I'm using it at every department. We try to speed up using the technology, but we still know where to stop and jump in with the personal touch, right? So yeah,
Last question as we're getting close to
sure,
wrapping up our show
okay,
here, Glenn. So
no
the
problem.
discipline of longevity, you've talked about it several times. Oh, I've had relationships 30, 40 years. I've been selling to this client, been around. You shared your age, although I'm a little bit skeptical. Are you 63? Maybe, right? You didn't leave me convinced there. I'm not sure.
Yeah. 1962. So that's how I do know is my birth year.
There
And
you go,
so,
right?
well,
So
yeah,
you got a 64th coming up here.
I
So
do.
that said,
Yeah.
anything you want to leave the audience with respect to how do you get through year after year, decade after decade, grinding, moving forward so that you can build, right? This whole idea of longevity with the discipline you bring to it and not burning out in the process. What's your guidance?
Yeah. So, you know, like I'd love to have these like like awfully philosophical answers for you and whatever, right? But like I find, most people are motivated by either fear or greed, right? And so the you need to use those if that's true in any at any level, right? You need to use them in a positive way to motivate and push you forward, right? Right? So the fear of being poor and the prospect of getting ahead financially, right? And there's lots of parts of my story I didn't get to tell. My company almost went bankrupt once. I sold one of my businesses for over $10 million to a public company that went bankrupt, and I ended up getting no money and having given away my company after 15 years and had to start over in my 40s and rebuild from scratch, literally. And so what did I do, and how do I keep moving in the face of some of these challenges or whatever? Well, I just always just get up every day and just put the next foot forward, doing the next right thing, as small as it might be. Because as you look back over the days and weeks and months, which seem to go faster and faster, time seems to be speeding up. Um, you're amazed at what you've accomplished, and like sitting on the couch suffering and crippling depression, it's just not going to get you anywhere, right? Like that's where motion does help you, right? Is doing things. So like I could work from home. I don't need to, I could have bought this company in Florida and done most of it from Toronto, where 100% of my family is. But I'm like, no, I literally got a place in Orlando, and I get up every morning and I drive to work in Highway 4 traffic, which is a nightmare and not as bad as Toronto, but and I come to work every day, right? I just do the next right thing, and I do it just for the sake of doing it, and that becomes its own reward, and it drives me forward, right? But you want to be passionate about what you're selling. You don't want to be selling the crappy brands. You don't want to be, selling the also rans. So I'm always looking for the next cutting edge thing, and a leg up where what I'm selling is at least in demand. There's going to be competition, but you want to have an ability to compete at least a level playing field, with the brand leaders. So I don't know. Those are some of my thoughts on what to do. So
So we've got one more signature question before we go. But
sure,
before that, Glenn
okay,
Poulos, president of Prague USA and
yeah.
author of Never Sit in the Lobby, because we've learned that lesson now. Where can people find you, learn about you, get your books?
So yeah, I have a website, but it's easier just to connect with me on LinkedIn, and if they want to talk to me on LinkedIn, or my website's got my books and stuff there, and it links to all the everywhere and all the socials. But I'm very active on LinkedIn, and I'm commenting and participating every day there. So spreading the message. So
Excellent. Now, last question. If we got to
sure,
peek in that closet of yours, be it in Toronto or Orlando, right?
yeah.
And we got to look at some footwear that personified who you are, Glenn Poulos. What are we looking at, and why is that footwear so you?
Yeah, so much to the chagrin of my wife, right? So 100% of the shoes that I have in Florida, I'm in Florida right now, right, are from Target. And I do have a really nice pair of dress shoes, but I didn't bring them from Canada because I never wear them, right? But um, when I had to get a whole new wardrobe of clothes or whatever, right? I went to like the Gap and I went to Old Navy and I went to Target, right? And wardrobe solved, right? And so I'm not one that's going to be moved by, like, brands are cool and whatever, but I'm never going to spend the top dollar on them. I've just never been motivated by that, right? And I've kind of a Lee jeans guy in a Levi's world, right? And that's kind of what you'd see, right? But I like them in a lot of different colors, but I don't like to have to spend a lot of money on them, right? So, you know, that's honestly what you'd find. And yeah, and my wife's happy that it's no longer Walmart, so
So you've moved up. There you go, right?
I've
It's
moved up a
there you are.
notch.
Well, and that's just it, right? You need to be dressed, but necessarily
Yeah,
dressed well, and you got other
yeah,
priorities, things, and
yeah,
who cares, right?
yeah,
I like it. It's a fun question. I've asked hundreds of people, and so
sure,
I always get a different answer. That's what makes it fun. All right,
yeah.
Glenn, this show is a wrap. Stay tuned. It won't be too long before we are airing live, and we'll be soon
Okay,
on that. Thank you so much for being on the
thank you.
show.
Thanks for having me.